I'm Dorothy Dyer, and I'm one of the directors at Cover2Cover Books. And in fact, it was my experience with my school learners who I taught that started the whole idea for it. Because I was teaching high school, a school for kids from Lange Township, and I was teaching them English, and I knew that the most important thing I could do for them is to get them reading. Because if you read for pleasure, your language will look after itself. And so I had a little book center, a little corner in the classroom where I had lovely books, and I got them to read once a week. And some kids went for it, but there were others who just couldn't get into reading, and I'd see them, their cell phone under their desk, sort of do unmix it at the time, and they just didn't see books as something that was exciting for them. There were a couple of books that worked well. There was one or two South African books, and then there was a series called the Blueford series, which was from America, and it was aimed at getting young Black Americans reading for pleasure. It was set in projects that had issues of drugs and gangs and things that the kids could relate to, and the English was accessible. And I said to my kids, I had done some writing of my own, and I had a writer friend. I said, we need a book like this. We need books like this set in South Africa. And they said, yes, miss. And that's how it started. The first book was Broken Promises, and it started off with, I showed Roz, a friend of mine who's a writer and is now a co-director at Cover2Cover. I showed her a Blueford book, and I said, we need a South African version. And she wrote the first chapter or two of a South African story, and I brought it to school, and I wanted to test it with the kids. I gave it to one or two good readers because I wanted to see if it worked as a book. And then at the end of class, when we finished early, I read the chapter out, and I was stunned by the reaction. Kids just said, where's chapter 2, miss? I want more, miss. And the chapters went viral. So I'd be bringing them in A4 staple pages, and kids would be wanting more and more. And that's when I realized this is something that we need to be producing. And so Broken Promises was our first book, and it was workshopped with my learners in the class. So I'd go and ask them, so if she went to the shebeen, what would she do? How would it work? So they kind of helped with the whole process. And you can see on the cover of Broken Promises, the original cover, you can see one or two learners from that class itself. I don't think there's enough fiction in South Africa for children and young adults, and I think it's critical that children see themselves in books, as that is a way to hook them into reading and make them realize that their world is worth a book. So I would love to see Cover2Cover grow in its reach, to get our books out there, to be read by people and young adults and children who maybe wouldn't have seen themselves as readers before. And maybe one day, if there's a writer who says, they asked, how did they fall in love with reading? And they said, well, you know, at school I read a book, a Harmony High book, and it made me realize I could write too. We've seen in responses to the books that they have had profound impacts on young people, saying they recognize their own worlds, their lives. And it's always so moving and humbling to see that we have had that impact and that we are affecting people's own relationships with their lives and their worlds and themselves. And I think that is one of the biggest gifts of reading. A girl who read Sugar Daddy, a girl who was very diligent and motivated and good at school, who would never herself be in a position to fall pregnant from a taxi driver, as the character in the book does. And she said it developed more empathy in her. She looked around and she saw what her peers were doing, and she realized why. So it helped her understand other people who were quite different from her. Another story, when we first started Broken Promises and we wanted to test it, I gave it to a friend who then gave it to her domestic worker's daughter. And her domestic worker's daughter wrote a little card saying, thank you for the book. If I hadn't had this book, I wouldn't now be reading books like Twilight. and it was at the time of Twilight and those Stephanie Meyer books. And at the time, I didn't recognize what a profound thing that was, that Harmony Hyde, Broken Promises, had made her realize that she could be a reader, and that is what we are hoping for our books. I think my vision for Cover2Cover would that it would be a leading publisher for children's and young adults fiction in South Africa, and that people would know when they see a Cover2Cover book, they'd know that it was exciting, they'd know it was quality, and that people are wanting to see our next release and excited about our work. So for Cover2Cover to be part of creating and developing a stronger culture of reading for pleasure in South Africa.